A fascinating place to visit that we're going to be hearing about tonight from Luke Paterson, our speaker. Luke has 22 years of experience leading groups to individuals as well as group tours to photograph wildlife and birds, and also bird watch, of course. And so he has experience in guiding in the Northern Territory, the Kimberley region of Western Australia, Sri Lanka as well. Luke has appeared on Australian television, speaking about the wonders of wildlife and birds in the Northern Territory. He's represented the Northern Territory government in marketing tours of festivals, marketing events in Europe. And his tour group, Northern Territory Bird Specialists, has received the prestigious Brolgo Award, which is awarded for excellence in touring. So he is just a fascinating person. I've had the pleasure of being out with him several times in the Northern Territory, out to Kakadu National Park, which is a World Heritage area. And in fact, the last time I was out with him, we had the pleasure of seeing a red goshawk, a chick near the nest. And the red goshawk is one of the rarest birds in Australia. And all the times I've been in Australia, I had never seen one until Luke took us out there. So we're very pleased. It's a real pleasure to have been out in the field with Luke, and we can all look forward to a great talk and learning more about what a great place the Northern Territory is to birds. Thanks, Luke. It's all yours. Good to have you.
Thanks very much, Bill. And wow, what a introduction! I didn't realise there was so much, but no, it's been an absolute pleasure. And g'day, everybody. It's been an absolutely amazing here, and hopefully everything all going well over there. Now I'm just hoping that this is going to share nicely for us all. Let's just have a look now. Alrighty, so hopefully we can we see the slideshow? Sorry,
that looks fine, Luke.
That looks fine. Okay, excellent. Well, Bill, thank you once again, and such a warm introduction, I must admit. Now, I've had the pleasure, as Bill said, of guiding throughout the Northern Territory for over 20 years, and to me now, it is pretty much home for me. It's a beautiful big backyard of where there's plenty to explore. And for me, birdwatching, it's not only a job, it's a passion, it's a tool for conservation, and it's also, I suppose, it creates experiences that enjoy for pretty much everybody, young and old. So, and that's the beauty of birdwatching in a sense as well. So, and everybody has their own little stories and can relate to it, which I absolutely love. And yeah, just love seeing the joy of people actually seeing new birds and places that they've never been to and experienced. So for me, yeah, it's just an absolute pleasure. But folks, for those of you who don't know where the Northern Territory is, okay, so Australia is quite large. The Northern Territory itself, well, it's centrally located north. And to give you some idea about the size, we're looking at about 540,000 square miles. Okay, so it is quite large. And for example, I think Colorado is sitting at about 104,000 square miles. So just over 5 times the size of the state of Colorado. And you'll be finding that that's pretty much the size of the Northern Territory. The territory itself, though, as everybody likes to call it, especially in the Northern Territory, we always just call it the territory. But from the very north to the south, it's over 1,000 miles in length. Okay, so and if you can see where Darwin is up to the north and right down to the south where Alice Springs, it's just on about 1,000 miles. So there is quite a bit of distance, and obviously the topography changes right throughout. So to the tropics in the north, to the semi-arid and the arid regions into the south. So you're going to get a whole host of different species, not only plants, animals, but also birds as you journey all the way down there as well. Now, Today, I'm just going to have a look at a few little places more so up the north, not so much down in the south. Otherwise, we won't have enough time to see absolutely all of the Northern Territory, let alone Australia. But Darwin itself, this is my base. This is where we actually tour from. But as you can see, it's located right on a little peninsula. Now, that's a fantastic place, not only for obviously birds. I mean, we have many different environments right around. So the biodiversities or the number of species of birds that we get around Darwin is quite good. It's over 250 different species. So with that, it's a very tropical city. We're obviously surrounded in areas with mangroves, as you can see in the foreground. The population of Darwin, though, we're looking at around about 127,000 people. And in the territory itself, there's only roughly 250,000 people. So it's not a huge, as in population as such, but it almost feels like a big country town. Now, to the north of Darwin, we have a KBA, or a key biodiversity area. Now, this is Shoal Bay. Now, Darwin itself gets around about an 8-metre tidal difference. So from obviously low tide to high tide, you get a huge expanse of mudflats being exposed during low tide. And this is fantastic for migratory shorebirds. So I thought we'd start with one of the birds, well, a few of the birds that obviously travel the furthest to get to Australia. But the reason why this is a KBA is more so for one particular shorebird, which is the great knot. Now, they arrive into Darwin roughly around about October, if not a little bit earlier, into September. But these birds will come here in their thousands. And of course, what they're doing, it's a very important staging point for these birds. Some of them will hang around. However, they'll be taking what's known as the East Asian Australasian Flyway. Now, this will go all the way from the Russian tundra, making their way south through Southeast Asia, and then of course into Australia, where some of them will stay in Darwin and others will continue on further down south, down into places like Melbourne, Adelaide, etc. So they do travel quite some distance. It's around about 8,000 to 9,000 kilometre trip one way. So in Darwin, it's very, very important. Obviously, they'll come here, they'll congregate, they'll feed with other species of shorebirds. And of course, we can get big flocks of up to around about 4,000 to 5,000. So it is an impressive sight just to see these birds right on Darwin's doorsteps. Unfortunately, these birds making this huge, huge journey, they will actually, well, come across quite a few pressures. Now, some of the native pressures that they get, things such as, predatory birds. Things like here, as it was showing, is a white-bellied sea eagle. Now, this is taken, unfortunately, a bar-tailed godwit, which no doubt was probably exhausted and resting on the beach. And for things such as white-bellied sea eagles, they are a very, very easy source of food. So they'll come down and just obviously take the weak. So it is a very important staging point for these migratory shorebirds. Another pressure that these shorebirds face is actually from humans. Now, considering that there's quite a bit of residential area right beside a place such as Shoal Bay, we're getting a lot of people using the beaches, and a lot of the time there'll be people walking their dogs, and of course dogs love running after flocks of birds. And so what will happen is that these shorebirds will just be constantly flying back and forth, especially when it's time to rest at their roosting site. So it's a big education now with the local people in Darwin about obviously people walking their dogs and having access to certain beaches, and certain access will just be for shorebirds. So it's very, very significant that this education sort of just keeps on coming out. So for the shorebirds, yeah, it's brilliant. Now, it's not only shorebirds that you find around the coast, okay? Having such beautiful sandy coast as well, with some beautiful sheer cliffs, it makes it perfect conditions for some nesting birds. Now, one of the smallest birds that we have up around Darwin is what's known as a striated pardalote. Now, these birds will actually nest into the actual side of a wall, okay, just a sandy bank, and they'll burrow a little tunnel inside, and this is where they'll be having their nest. Now, it's not only striated pardalotes, but it's also perfect for things such as rainbow bee eaters as well. Now, this is a favourite of a lot of people, obviously there's bee eaters in many different places around the world, and it's very difficult, well, for me personally, to walk away if you've got a bee eater somewhere, to try and get a photo of it. Yeah, it's always a joy to get a photo of a bee eater. They're just stunning birds, beautiful, so agile in flight. But once again, these birds will actually nest into the side of these banks. But of course, being nearby Darwin as well, we actually have a little area literally only 5 minutes away. As you can see, these dangerous creatures here, yes, you need to keep an eye out for these ones, but these are known as agile wallabies. Okay, now here we have a couple of young males having a bit of a territorial stoush, but normally though, they're just a beautiful little creature. And like I said, only 5 minutes out of Darwin, there's a lovely little reserve just right beside the coast. And you can easily see things like this, agile wallabies just hopping around all over the place. So it's one of the beauties about Darwin. There's still some magic environments just right in the city itself. Now, featuring, as I was touched on earlier, just around Darwin, we have mangroves. Now, these are essential environments right around the actual coastline. It's a bit of a buffer zone. Now, where we're located in Darwin, it's obviously we get a lot of cyclonic weather. And so with these big tides, these big storms coming through, the mangroves are the one which are normally buffering it. So it's protecting obviously what's on the other side. So the mangroves though, quite unique around Darwin. Of around about the 50 different species of mangroves which have been listed in the world, Darwin Harbour has 36 of those mangroves. Okay, so it's quite a high population or high density of different species of mangroves that we get within the harbour, which is absolutely brilliant. And once again, a fantastic environment for quite a few different species of birds. We get things such as Teresian kingfishers. Okay, now Teresian kingfishers are pretty exclusive around the coast of where they'll be hunting for things such as little crabs, even mud skippers. But they'll also be nesting inside the bigger, older mangroves on the outer edges of these environments. And they're pretty unique call. You'll hear them generally before you actually get to see them as well. One bird, though, that a lot of people come to Darwin for is a chestnut rail. Now, the chestnut rail, it's about the size of a chicken, so it's a decent size, but these will be skulking in around the mangrove roots. Now, certain areas, once the tide goes down, hopefully you'll be looking for these birds coming out and feeding on whether or not anything is washed up or crabs just on the actual edge of the water. But they are very, very elusive and quite shy. But the sound of these rails is almost like pigs grunting, I suppose. And so a lot of the times, yeah, once again, you'll hear this call and you'd be very unsure what it is, but it'll be chestnut rails calling. Now, not only chestnut rails around the water's edge, but you get many other birds coming around the water's edge. Now, if anybody has been around Darwin or is going to Darwin, just be very, very careful around the water's edge. I know it's great for birds, but it's also very, very easy to become the next meal for potential, snapping handbags, as we call them, or saltwater crocodiles. Now, these crocodiles, the saltwater crocodile, are found pretty much throughout every water body throughout the Northern Territory, in the tropics, I should say, not so much around Alice Springs, but in the tropics. This is where you'll find, saltwater crocodiles lurking in pretty much any water body. So freshwater, saltwater, doesn't matter. They'll be around. So it's just to be making sure that you're, nice and safe away from the water's edge. You don't want to be ending up like this mullet, being the next meal for a saltwater crocodile. Now, around Darwin, like I said, not only coast, you also get beautiful little pockets of monsoon forest. Now, we don't really get things as a traditional rainforest, only because traditional rainforest, you need constant rain throughout the year. We only get our rainfall during the wet season, and our wet season is generally from, most of our rain will fall from December through to around about April. So we only get a short little window of where the actual rainfall will be coming down. So the monsoon forests, though, are fantastic. They're generally a little bit cooler, and it's a little bit quieter, but in the heat of the day, it's a nice area to come in and just have a bit of reprieve. But there's some specialties in here as well. Once again, bird watchers birdwatchers from around the world will be coming in and searching just for little gems, and things such as rainbow pitta is one particular species that they love to come in for. Now, not only rainbow pitta, okay, being such this beautiful little bird hopping around the ground, up above, you'll also get another, probably one of my personal favourites around Darwin, is rose-crowned fruit doves. Now, these are very, very important, not only obviously for bird watchers to have a look at, obviously, being very biased, but they're important for the monsoon forest as they're frugivores. Okay, so they'll particularly feast on fruits, and they're important in spreading the different seeds from one area to another, so that obviously the next generation of plants will then continue on. And as you can see, it sort of looks like me when I'm actually eating mangoes in the mango season in Darwin, of getting a nice big mouthful and tucking into it. But the rose-crowned fruit doves do a fantastic job of spreading the seeds. And it's not only good with birds spreading the seeds, but also mammals as well. And we get flying foxes, okay? And these aren't a true bat as such, but these flying foxes, they'll also be looking for nectar, looking for fruit, and they'll also be dispersing, and they can fly kilometers away from all these monsoon pockets, and of course depositing these seeds everywhere they go. These are also a favored food source for another bird. Okay, now in the monsoon forest, it's a fantastic place. It's nice and dark, so things or species such as owls, they absolutely love going for things such as little flying foxes, little red flying foxes I should say, or even black flying foxes. Now, the rufous owl is our second largest owl species in Australia, so it's quite large, but it's a hawk owl, and they'll not only feast on things such as black flying foxes, they can also take down things such as other birds as well. I know quite a few pigeons are quite often seen by people walking through, and they'll see the remains of pigeons on the ground and look up, and there'll be, well, half a remain still sitting with the owl, but also possums as well. Now, we get quite sizable possums up there, brush-tailed possums, and it's also a favoured food source for these particular owls. Now, we have another owl species, once again, pretty much in the same environment, can only be just maybe 50 to 100 meters away from each other, okay? But this particular owl is called a barking owl, and the barking owls, they're quite amazing. At nighttime, if you're outside and if you're listening to the beautiful sounds of the Australian bush, what you can find is that you'll hear a barking going on, and it sounds a little bit like woof 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 woof. And quite often people will come back and they'll tell me, and they'll say, we've heard this dog, there's this dog calling out there. And I'll say to them, no, it's no dog. And they say, oh, do you have a dingo? Dingo's around. I'll say, dingoes are around, but they don't bark like a dog. And so they'll howl. And I'll explain to them obviously about this barking owl, and it's just amazed to think that a species, an owl species, can be barking like this, and it's quite incredible. And so, yeah, it's always a joy to come across those. Now, a little bit further out, going from Darwin, okay, now if you're heading over in a easterly direction, over to, as Bill was describing, the World Heritage Kakadu National Park. Now, this is Australia's largest terrestrial national park. Okay, our largest national park overall is the Great Barrier Reef, but for land, Kakadu, yeah, it's just under 20,000 square kilometers in size, so it's quite large, but it is absolutely amazing. It is a biodiversity hotspot. Okay, so there's so many different species which are found through here. In fact, the rate of endemism is also very, very high. So we have endemic species that are only found in this particular region and nowhere else in the world. And I'll be going through some of those species with you today. But this is, yeah, it's one of my favorite places touring right throughout the top end. Now, every single wetland that you'll find throughout Kakadu National Park is Ramsar listed, which is, well, quite amazing. And as you can see here, for good reason too, the magpie geese that we get throughout, which is a unique species, the only one in its family. But this particular magpie goose, yeah, we get them in literally hundreds of thousands. In fact, there was one area that we went to late last year. We had a group of guests. We went out onto this we got out of the car, and in the car park, all we could hear it was almost like humming like bees. Okay. And of course, everybody thought there was a beehive nearby, but it wasn't bees. It was actually the sounds or the honking of the geese. There was just thousands and thousands of geese. And as we walked out towards this floodplain, just the numbers of geese. We went through and I gave a very, very rough estimate, well, there would have been more, but a very, very rough estimate of at least 30,000 geese just feeding out on this floodplain. It was just phenomenal. As far as you could see, there was just geese. And what happens is that our wetlands go through quite dramatic changes. So as you could imagine, during our wet season, these water levels go right up. And so there's not too many birds around in that particular region because everything is spread out. There's so much food everywhere. But as those water levels then go down and decrease, you then find that they'll get to certain levels. And so more and more birds will find food as the level sort of goes down. And as the level gets down to a certain level, the geese will come in, and what they're feeding on is a small little chestnut. It's a water chestnut called Iliocaris, and it's one of the world's highest concentration of carbohydrate. So these geese will be feasting and feasting and feasting. And one of the stories that we love to share with people, obviously the local Aboriginal culture in Kakadu as well. And the name for themselves in Kakadu is binning. So the local binning, they love obviously going for geese, and especially after they've gone and feasting on the Iliocaris. And what you'll find is that when they go and hunt the geese, and they used to go and hunt them with big water-soaked sticks, which they'll throw up once the birds have actually gone from a feeding area to a roosting site. They'll position themselves in an area, the local binning, I should say, would position themselves in an area where they know where these birds are going to fly over. And they'd actually throw these sticks up in these flocks and just knock the birds down, injuring them. But you not only get the meat from the goose, which is a very, very red meat, but you also then cut open the gullet and you'll find all these little water chestnut bulbs. So not only do you get your meat from the goose, you also get your vegetable as well, which is pretty amazing. And it's a real safety thing as well, because obviously the geese are risking their lives feasting out there when there's thousands of crocodiles out there as well. So it's a good way of, well, getting their food. Now, I would personally suggest when you are going out in especially these vast floodplains, one of the best ways to get out there is on boats. Okay, and there's quite a few different possibilities of getting out there and exploring these beautiful floodplains. And what you'll find is that on these boats, one of the reasons, once again, well, the number one reason in my book are these. Okay, I can't stress how many crocodiles there are out there. Now, from the 1970s, of when their numbers were actually really, really low, you could go out and hunt saltwater crocodiles. Up until the mid-1970s, before they banned hunting. And what you'd find is that the numbers of crocodiles, they actually went as low as about 3,000. Now, at the moment, we have about 100,000 just in the Northern Territory alone, okay? So, and that's just a very rough estimate. They believe that there's many, many more. Now, it was interesting, last year, I had a colleague of mine living out a little bit further away in one of these or nearby waterways, and he showed me some photos of a 5-meter crocodile actually chomping down on what they believe was about a 3-meter crocodile, which I couldn't believe until I actually saw the photos. And this monster crocodile was actually just sitting up, and you could see just half of this other crocodile hanging out. And they said the people who took the photo sat there for 2 hours and just watched while they were in their boat. They just watched this crocodile just eating this other one, and it took 2 hours for this crocodile. And this crocodile just stayed positioned out of the water, pretty much like this. And it sat there for about 2 days, just slowly sort of just digesting. And then, before it had enough energy, I suppose, to then take off and go elsewhere. But they are amazing creatures, though, I must admit. Absolutely amazing. Now, normally, they actually feast on things such as fish, okay, things like barramundi. And one other species which loves barramundi out there is marawuti. And in the local Aboriginal language out there, marawuti is the name for white-bellied seagull. Now, these white-bellied seagulls, they're quite prolific throughout the waterways, and it shows how healthy it is and how much food source is available there. So impressive. These are actually a very close relative to bald eagles as well. Okay, so yeah, check out for white-bellied seagulls when you're over here next, that's for sure. Now, going from one of the larger predators of the waterways to one of the smallest kingfishers in the world. Okay, now this kingfisher is known as the little kingfisher. These are only about 4 inches tall, so they're quite small. And one of the prize birds to be on the lookout for when you're cruising these waterways, as they'll be just tucked up, generally nice and tied up against the water's edge. Another favourite to go out and look for are black bittens. Okay, once again, bird watchers, they love all the tough and hard species to get. And this is another tough species. They generally skulk around the water's edge, just hiding, just making sure that they've got something in between you and them. And quite often it's dense vegetation. But if you're lucky enough, you might come across one that's just walking along the water's edge as it's going for a bit of a feed. But yeah, they're a fantastic species. From the black bitten, we have some of the bigger birds that we find out. And one of our species of crane in Australia are brolgers. Okay, now once again, Bill was talking about brolgers before, but brolgers, they are one of 2 separate species of crane that we get in Australia. Now, the Cirrus crane is generally found over in Queensland. The brolger is pretty much right throughout, and they do a beautiful courtship dance of where the male and female will be dancing up in front of one another, just like many other cranes around the world. They have a little dewlap or a little gula pouch just underneath the throat as well. Now, they'll quite often get things and just throw them up in the air, and it's absolutely amazing to see them dance and just rip up vegetation and just flick it up into the air. It's quite amazing. It won't happen every single time you come across them, but when you get to see it, oh, it's magic, absolutely magic. Now, from one of the bigger birds that we have out in the floodplains to another, okay, it's a black-necked stork. Now, this is one species that's, once again, absolutely, well, love seeing them. And it's not only in Australia that you do get to see black-necked storks. In Australia, there's a lot of Australians who have a tendency to call them jabberoos. They're not jabberoos, they're black-necked storks. They're found right throughout Southeast Asia, even over into Sri Lanka as well. But Australia is the only place of where a lot of Australians, well, will call them jabberoos, but they are black-necked storks. Now, one of the amazing species that we get to find out on the floodplains as well, jacanas. And the species that we have in Australia is the comb-crested jacana. Now, as with other species as well of jacanas, it's quite amazing to actually see these birds, obviously, with their long toes spreading right out, just spreading their weight over a large surface area so they can walk on the lilies, hence the name lily trotter or Jesus bird, as it looks as if it's walking on water. However, they also have an amazing ability to looking after their young, and it's the males which will look after the young. The female will pretty much lay the eggs, and she's off, she's away. And it's the male's duty to then look after the eggs, rear the youngs, and what he'll do, if there's any danger in the area, and the young are little fluff balls with huge feet, but if there's any danger, he'll give a little chirp, and he'll open up his wings, and they'll all come running up, and they'll tuck up under his wings, and he'll just lift them up, and you see all these little legs just hanging down under the wings, and he'll run them off to safety. It's quite amazing to see. One of the species which is really, well, in dire trouble out in Kakadu, unfortunately, is a yellow chat, or subspecies of yellow chat. It's known as the Alligator River subspecies of yellow chat. But yeah, they believe that there's only around about 50 of these birds known out in the floodplains throughout Kakadu. So yeah, it's not looking good for this particular species, but it's an absolute gem of a bird if you do get to come across it. But it's one of the species, yeah, which is very, very vulnerable out on the floodplains. And some of the issues that they have out there, they believe fire management has a little bit of issue, more so to do with actual feral animals though. So things like feral pigs, also buffalo. So they'll actually go out and pretty much just destroy a lot of the vegetation that these birds depend on. And so it creates these barren landscapes of where these birds don't have anywhere to sort of dive into or look for any vegetate or any insects around the vegetation. So yeah, one of the issues within Kakadu National Park. But Kakadu, it's not all just about obviously floodplains, okay? Around the stone country, it's quite amazing. And one of the bonuses of not only going out there looking for birds, but of course, it's rich in Aboriginal culture or the local binning culture. Now, we're talking a culture there that's being dated back to at least 65,000 years, which is quite remarkable. And that's actually going back looking at stone axe heads that they've dug up, they've had archaeological digs, but it's not only things such as the artifacts, the artwork there though. There's over 5,000 listed art sites within Kakadu National Park. And it's quite remarkable, some of the artwork that you get to see there. So many different styles, okay? And the more modern style is what's known as rock work or cross-hatching, but it's really, yeah, quite phenomenal. Now, it's also the birds that do get featured on the rock art. And the rock art is, well, quite amazing. And what you'll find is that here it's actually depicting magpie goose, okay? So quite often with the rock art, it's not only just putting artwork up there for the sake of it. There is generally a story or a meaning behind the artwork. Sometimes it might be just showing the food source which is available. And around Kakadu, magpie goose, well, it was a prolific around the area, so it was a very important food source for the local clans in the area. But when you're looking at some of the artwork, you're also looking for some of the endemic species as well. Now, things such as Wilkins rock wallaby doesn't look as dangerous as those agile wallabies, but they're very cute. They'll be bounding around the rocks. They have very, very short limbs that you can see here as well, which makes them much more agile amongst the rocks. And a very, very, well, whippy, I suppose, tail, which gives them extra balance as they're going through. Now, it's not only Wilkins rock wallaby to keep an eye out for, but also reptiles as well. Now, I was lucky enough to come across, this is probably one of the rarest snakes, if not the rarest snake in Australia, which is known as Owen Python, or in local language known as Narawan. Now, Narawan, it's very, very cryptic, okay? It can live up in treetops, it can live in around the rocks. I've only ever come across 2 of them in the wild, and this one, we only came across this, it would have been a couple of years ago at least now, but it was the first time I came across it. It was quite interesting. We were walking along, I was just with a couple of guests, and we heard a great bowerbird just screeching and going crazy. And of course, if you're in tune and if you know what's happening around in the environment, you can listen and the birds will tell you, they'll let you know what's going on. And what happened was that this great bowerbird was just so distraught, going crazy. And we followed it up and just had a look up in this tree. And we found this snake, and it only just caught a black-faced cuckoo shrike, which was another bird. But it was the first time ever that this bird's been documented actually feeding on a bird. So yeah, for me, it was a bit of a buzz just to see the snake, but to see it actually eating a bird as well was quite significant. And a lot of people were very, very interested to hear about that news in the museum, and a lot of people working with reptiles in around Darwin. So quite amazing. But one of the endemics or bird species that we find around Kakadu is a black-banded fruit dove. Okay, once again, a fantastic species in amongst the rocks, looking for the fruits. It's quite shy, generally quite difficult to come across, but quite a sizable fruit dove as well. Much, much bigger than the rose-crown fruit dove. But once again, pretty much just restricted to that stone country. Going from the fruit dove, we then have chestnut-quilled rock pigeon. Now, it's not the most glamorous of species, but it blends in incredibly well. And when they take off, they have these beautiful chestnut windows. Now, as they take off, very, very heavy wing beats, but glorious bird nonetheless. And as you're walking around, this particular species, white-lined honeyeater, if anybody says to me and says, Luke, what bird sort of represents Kakadu National Park? And a lot of people could say magpie goose or white-bellied seagull. For me, though, around Stone Country, this is the bird for me that, as soon as I hear it, I just know that I'm in Kakadu. And the sound, it just resonates right throughout. And I'm going to hopefully play for you. So hopefully you've got to hear a little snippet of what it actually sounds like. But when you're walking through Stone Country, honestly, it just resonates all around, very, very loud, but just a magic species. Now, once again, I'm been extremely lucky with my time spent in Kakadu National Park. You get to know a lot of local people as well, and I've been working with quite a few different ranger groups and doing a lot of involvement in training and research. And it's amazing the amount of knowledge that not only you're passing on to them, but they're actually passing on to you as well. And it's very much a two-way street of educating each other. But around Kakadu, we actually go up looking in the Stone Country, and if we come across purple-backed fairy wrens, we're actually hopeful that there's another species which is nearby, which would be the white-throated grass wren. Now, this is a species that you find pretty much restricted to isolated pockets up on the Stone Country. And I've been lucky enough to get up in helicopters and go and search in different areas and come across these magic birds. And I'll show you a little video and hopefully it'll work. But these birds just run along the rocks, run along the rocks like little rats. And an amazing bird to come across. And if you're familiar with grass wrens, they're one of the toughest species to sort of come across in Australia, but they're always a thrill whenever you see a grass wren, no matter what it is, just to see these birds. Now, from the Stone Country, we have the beautiful woodlands. And the woodlands, it's made up of a lot of eucalyptus species, okay? So in Australia, there's many hundreds of species of eucalypts, okay? Predominantly in Kakadu National Park, it's Eucalyptus tetradonta, or otherwise known as stringy bark, and Eucalyptus miniata, which is woolly butt. But these two particular species are very important for a host of bird species, things such as partridge pigeons. They love nesting in the grass, but they're found throughout these particular woodlands. Things such as red-backed fairy wrens, and any fairy wren, once again, they're just a thrill to actually see. But this is a male. The females are pretty much just all grey. Okay, so the redbacks are just, stunning birds, and it's the same colours as my local football team, Jabiru Bombers, and also, Essendon Bombers, which is an AFL game. Well, if anybody of you know of it, but anyway, that's same colours. But further south, we actually have hooded parrots and glorious birds. And this particular species, it's what's so unique about it, apart from obviously being endemic to this small little area, where they nest is actually inside termite mounds. Okay, now we have termite mounds in the Northern Territory, which get up to about 18 feet or 6 meters in height. So very tall. But these species will actually nest exclusively inside the termite mound. So they'll dig a little hole once again into the termite mound. Fantastic protection from fires, from floods, generally predators as well. Quite often it's only small little monitors that'll find their way up in there. But absolutely glorious birds though. The turquoise blue and that beautiful golden flash on the actual wing is just absolutely spectacular. But keep on going through. We have our largest kingfisher as well. Now, up there we have, around the territory, the top end especially, is blue-winged kookaburra. It's not as, the call, it's not like your typical laughing kookaburra. It tries to laugh, but can't laugh at all, okay? So it's definitely, a kingfisher that'll go looking for small little insects. It'll go looking for snakes as well. If you've got other birds nesting in the area, like little woodland birds, they'll be very, very alarmed from this bird because it'll come in and actually take the little chicks out of the nest as well. So they're always wary of this one. And this particular species is a male, as it's got a beautiful blue tail. The female will have a brown-blue striped tail just going through. However, the king or queen of the actual woodlands, as Bill was actually talking about earlier as well, red goshawk. And this particular species, as we were discussing a little bit earlier, we know of around about, I think it's about 38 known breeding pairs in Australia. Okay, so they don't know exactly how many species there are, or how many numbers of this particular species there are, I should say. There's a fellow I know over in Queensland doing some research, and what he's found, he's put a little radio tracker on them, and it flew, I think, around about 800 kilometres south into different regions, just over during its wet season, and then as it came back up towards the Cape York, I think it was, it came back up there to breed. So they have a huge area that they go through, and they turn up in all sorts of places, but we're lucky enough to know of at least one nesting site around in Kakadu National Park. And these, you may have seen the blue wing, well, if you saw the blue wing kookaburra before, they're actually on the food source for the red goshawk. There was one previous nest of where we saw the kill tree, and underneath there was actually skulls of, I saw 5 blue-winged kookaburras. Okay, there was also things like pheasant cuckoo, which is quite a big bird, channel-billed cuckoo, once again, big birds. And there was also a lower mandible of this particular species, which is tawny frogmouth. Now, generally, a nocturnal species, but if you're lucky enough to find them in the day, they'll be very, very cryptic. Okay, so very much looking like a dead branch. They'll just be blending in quite well. But during night time, they'll go out looking for things. So they won't use their feet as such to get their food. It's all to do with their mouth, just like nightjars. They'll come down and grab and then eat. But yeah, I was amazed to actually find the lower mandible of a tawny frogmouth just at the bottom of this kill tree of the red goshawk though. But once again, just magic, magic birds. Now, this is one particular species that, well, a lot of people come to the territory to look for. Okay, it's a very popular bird worldwide as well. It's very popular in aviaries. They breed quite well in many different colours. This is, of course, the Gouldian finch. Now, once again, one of my particular favourites, having the Gouldian finch. And we do get the red face form. We get the black face form as well. The very, very slim chance of getting the golden face form, okay, I think I've come across maybe one, and I only got a brief glimpse of it, knowing that it was just a little bit different, but it took off in the distance and I couldn't get onto it again. And I've come across flocks of these, and with good news, around about almost 1,000 of these birds, which is pretty amazing. And so these birds used to be listed as endangered. They have now been downgraded as listed as vulnerable. Okay, so which is a good thing. The numbers are getting out there. I think it's probably more so that there's a lot more people going out there, finding them, doing a little bit more citizen science, reporting all these numbers of the Gouldian finches. But they are recovering pretty well, especially in the Territory. The Northern Territory is a really good stronghold for the Gouldian finch. And there's groups over in Queensland where they're doing some research there as well with Queensland finches. And they're actually finding some good numbers as well. Western Australia, also a good population of Gouldian finches there. So it's really good to see that this beautiful popular aviary bird is actually still found in the wild in very, very good numbers. And hopefully, I'll just show a little video as well. Now, as you can see, hopefully from that video, but the Gouldian finches, they love coming down. If you find little shrinking water holes and if you know the right ones, and if you sit there quietly, yeah, and give them a chance to just get used to you, they'll come in and they'll come in. You see there, the ones that weren't so colourful, they're the immature birds, okay? So it's not until they get into that adult plumage that they'll get that really striking colours. So the immature birds, just a little bit of green on the back and pretty much just a grey bird. And if you ever get to show a guest just an immature bird and that's all they get to see and they don't believe it's a Gouldian finch, so you need to see an adult, yeah, just to see those colours is just amazing. But you can also see they're a favoured food for other species, and this is an immature brown goshawk that came in looking for a bit of a feed, and it too was still pretty young, pretty green, had no chance of getting any of those, and didn't catch one while we were there, and it came in multiple times while the finches were coming through. So yeah, an amazing amazing environment though. Now, just a little bit further southwest, we're just going to have a quick little look in a place, another place that I personally love to go to. It's called the Victoria River region, and there is another national park down there. It's Judba or Gregory National Park, but there's also many just getting to it from Catherine, driving away along. The scenery again is just spectacular. You have beautiful cliffs like this, of where you'll have a river which is carved all the way through the Victoria River. But actually driving along through there, you drive through a little bit of flat country, a lot of farming land. They have a lot of cattle there as well. But it gives it a good chance to see things such as Australian bustards, which you might get to see just on the side of the road. This is one of Australia's heaviest flying birds, along with pelican, but very, very laboured takeoff as well. So if you're ever coming across, and if you do get to see one of these in the distance, try to slow down. Takes them a little bit of time to get up and go, but also a favoured food source for the local Aboriginal people as well. They say it tastes like turkey. I haven't tried it, but yeah, it is a favoured food source for them. Other birds to keep an eye out for just on roadsides are apostle birds. Now, these are quite interesting as well. They get around, as the name suggests, not so much as the 12 apostles. It can be more, it can be less, but they're quite gregarious. They're small little groups getting around, but they're mud nest builders as well. So they'll build this big mud nest, and all the birds will actually help to rear the next young coming through. So, but they've got a bit of attitude, and yeah, I quite enjoy them. Even though they're not the most striking and colourful, they do have a bit of attitude though, and yeah, they're quite amazing. But one of the biggest bird of prey that we do have in Australia is the wedge-tailed eagle. Okay, the white-bellied seagull is second in size. These particular species, or this species, it gets a wingspan of up to 2.8 meters. So it's a big bird. Now, these ones are quite often, once again, you'll generally find them feeding on the roadside and on roadkill, but yeah, you never know your luck with these birds. And the darker the bird, the older it is. If it's quite a brown colour bird, you'll find that it's actually an immature bird. But yeah, the older dark ones, yeah, they're quite stunning, but a big, powerful bird. But it's a little bit of colour that you'll find every now and then. Parrots, once again, it's really good for parrots. Red-winged parrots, just, well, image shows it pretty well. It's quite stunning, just this brilliant green with the red flash. But once again, water holes are quite essential in this drier environment. And if you sit down quietly at a water hole, it can be quite amazing to see what can actually turn up. And budgerigars are one of those particular, another parrot that'll come down, and sometimes you'll see them just coming in like little bullets. In others, you'll just see them taking off and it'll just be a sea of green. It's just absolutely amazing. And if you're lucky enough to get there, and there might be a flock of maybe 3,000 birds, we were sitting at just a little creek line, and it sounded like almost a road train, or what we call over here a road train, of where we have a truck and 4 trailers, but just roaring through. And these birds would be coming up and down the actual little creek line, and it just sounded just so loud, just the wings just going through. And if there was a raptor chasing them, oh, incredible. Things like hobbies or even falcons, just, it's unreal, amazing. It's National Geographic at its best. It's just going through very, very quick. But at these water holes, keep an eye out for other finches as well. Okay, so towards that area, we do tend to find a few more other species of finches, things like yellow rump mannikins, and also, as we're showing on the screen here now, star finches. And things that are right beside the Victoria River, there's a specialty fairy wren there, and this is a purple crown fairy wren. And if you're looking at the screen at the moment, you've actually got the male, which is on the right, which has got the purple crown, and the female with that nice little chestnut cheek. It's they're both beautiful, beautiful little birds in their own right. The male will go into eclipse. It'll actually lose that color, lose the purple crown, and it'll just go quite pretty much just have a dark black or black little patch just where the actual chestnut is on the female. So they are quite different from breeding to non-breeding. Now, coming up back into that stone country, okay, so we actually have another species which is quite unique to the stone country. Earlier we saw the chestnut quilled rock pigeon. Here we have what is known as the white quilled rock pigeon. Pretty similar. However, instead of showing the chestnut quills or the big chestnut windows in the wings, this will actually have a white coloration within the wings. However, this is not a predominant white in this subspecies. So over in the Kimberley, it's extremely white, and you'll see these big white windows going off. This only just has a tiny, tiny touch of white within the wings. So to bird watchers who are looking to chasing down the subspecies and just going really, really, finicky with the different species, this is a highly desired subspecies, but it is, I think it's a beautiful bird just amongst the rocks. And we also have another one which loves getting around the rocks also, which is spinifex pigeons. And this is one you will find down south as well, around Alice Springs, the dry regions. To me, these are like a little wind-up toy, as in you just wind them up and these little birds will just bob along and just bobbing their little crest up and down as they go along. They're just so comical. And it's normally not just one bird going through. You might have a little train of them just bobbing up and down, just walking along, and they're just glorious little pigeons. One of my favorites to see, I must admit. But folks, after a pretty long days out there, one of the beauties, once again, of being out in such remote country is just getting out and experiencing it and listening and enjoying the outdoors, and the nighttime in particular is a bit of a bonus for us. We don't have too many big predators that we need to worry about. You can just roll your swag out on the ground, and I love just experience just a million stars just at night time, and it's one of the beauties of being out in the Northern Territory. But folks, we are nearing our end, but I hope I haven't gone over for too long. But thank you very much, and it's been an absolute pleasure, and hopefully you'll be able to come over and experience this all for yourselves. It's an amazing place, and I just can't stop talking about it. But if you do get the chance, by all means, check it out. It's an amazing place to see.
Hey, Bill, you're still on mute there.
Let me just get going here.
Yep. I think you're on now, Bill. Oh, no.
Now?
Yep.
Okay. Oh, very good. Luke, thank you so much. Brought back lots of memories for me, and I think you've done a great job in showing what wonderful bird life and other wildlife awaits people in the Northern Territory at Kakadu National Park and in all the other areas around the top end, as the monsoonal portion of the Northern Territory in Australia is referred to as. We had some questions for you.
Oh, yes.
Let me just get to them for you. One question is, since birds are so involved in the propagation of plants through the spread of their seeds, have you seen changes possibly attributable to climate change in either the reduction in bird species in the region or perhaps in the plants, fruits, seeds that birds eat?
Yeah, it's a good question actually, and I think there's been sort of some examples, and this might be also determined with it is if it is due to climate change. If it's obviously we're experiencing hotter days in Darwin. There's just no doubt about it. It's. I'm not going to lie, it's pretty warm, but you're constantly getting days of 30 degrees Celsius. But it is creeping up 31, 32 degrees. But out in places like Kakadu, for example, there's been examples of monsoon vine forests and they're actually shrinking in size. And whether or not it's actually because it's getting drier or whether or not it might be to do with the fire regimes that are coming through, that if they're getting hotter, intense fires coming through, monsoon forests, for example, they don't like having fire coming through, okay? There's a lot of vegetation and trees in there that are just, they do not like it. They don't cope with it very well. And so if you get those fires coming in hotter and closer, that particular forest, that monsoon forest, is actually getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So I've seen it in some areas of where that's occurring. The other thing that we're seeing with potential climate change is sea level rise. Now, this is something that's going to affect quite a few things. If we do get greater sea level rise, a lot of those floodplains, they're all fresh water. And so if we actually get the salt water coming up higher and of course saltwater intrusion coming through, a lot of that vegetation will then disappear, and no doubt a lot of those species of birds will sort of either regress or just move elsewhere. So yeah, we are seeing it a little bit at the moment, definitely, of climate change.
Okay. There's of course a big mine in Jabiru, the Jabiru mine there. Do you see there's much conflict between mining and bird conservation there in the Kakadu area?
Yeah, that's another interesting story. Considering that the mine is now finishing up, and they have up until 2025, I think it is, until they finish that particular mine. So it's interesting in a sense. There's a whole lot of politics that you could get into here, and I'm not going to go too deep into it with you. Having lived out in Jabiru for a number of years with my wife out there, she was actually working with Kakadu National Park. But yeah, the mine itself, it was one of the most heavily regulated mines as well. And so they'd have to do water testing every day. They'd have to go through and make sure that all their safety checks are done. And what you're considering as well is that there's a lot of Aboriginal people who are reliant on waterways around there. And so this is the reason as to why they had to be so heavily regulated, and just to make sure that everything was going okay. As for birding conservation, they used to actually have a program of every year that have surveys around the region, just making sure or just seeing what the bird population is actually doing in their retention ponds, also around the woodland. So the mine itself, yeah, it will be coming to an end. And then of course it's going to be revegetated and then brought back into Kakadu National Park.
There are other uranium leases there in the nearby area, including in the park. What's the prospects for them being developed or not?
Yeah, good question. Very good question. So the Ranger mine was one of 3 mines that they had organised. There's Kungara mine, and there was also Jabiluka. Now, Jabiluka had big demonstrations back in the late 1990s, of which they stopped any sort of mining going on at Jabiluka. Kungara was only, when I say only recently, back in 2012, 2013, there was a fellow by the name of Jeffrey Lee, and he is a traditional owner from that area. He's from the Jock people, and he actually fought the actual mining company to actually stop any sort of mining going in there, and he actually won his land back. So it was about 13 square kilometres of the Kungara mining lease, which is now, he's actually taken back, and he's actually then given to the national parks and put into Kakadu National Park. As for Jabiluka, I don't know. I really don't know what the situation is going on there. So yeah, it's, at the moment though, it looks as if it's all pretty stable with obviously Ranger Mine finishing and Kungara, and then it just leaves a big question mark on the Jabiluka mining lease.
Okay, had another question about what length of trips do you lead? What varying lengths are in your
Oh, look, we
programs?
we yeah we vary in length from 1 day tours around Darwin to the more favourable, or the more popular ones, I should say, anything from 4 to 5 days, just on a loop going from Darwin to Kakadu down to Pine Creek and around. But we also do tours of where we go for 10 days from Darwin over to Western Australia, and even up to around about 2 weeks through the Kimberley. So these they do vary in length. It obviously depends on how much time people have got to spend. So yeah, it just depends really. So we're quite variable as well.
Okay, and if anybody wants to get in touch with you, what's your email?
If you want to get in contact with us, you can get in contact with tours at ntbirdspecialists with an S on the end .com.au. That'll be the best way to actually get in contact with us.
Okay. Just recently, we've had an article in our paper about night parrots. And we've had a question tonight about night parrots. What's the situation with night parrots? That's quite a story.
It is quite a story. It is quite a story. It's a bit of an ongoing saga, I suppose, with the night parrots. So from what I've been hearing on the grapevine, they're still doing some work over in where is it? It's in the southwest Queensland, of where they found the good numbers of night parrots. I've actually had a friend of mine who I used to work with over in Broome. He was one of the ones who discovered the night parrot over in WA in Western Australia, and I couldn't get any information of where I could find him over there from him. He was very tight-lipped about it, but they're finding out more and more. And there's another fellow who originally, John Young, I don't know if anybody's heard of him, but he's the one who really brought the night parrots, I suppose, just highlighting the importance and rediscovering the actual populations of the night parrot. So he's actually been out and found a few more nesting sites, he believes, or at least a few more sites of where he's been finding night parrots. So it's good to hear that there are more and more numbers of these parrots found throughout.
Okay. What are the biggest threats to bird populations now in Australia? Question we have.
I'd say habitat loss is one of the biggest ones, especially when you don't fully understand the species as well, and land clearing, or whether it's just lost to I think habitat loss for land clearing in particular is quite a devastating one. Also, I think this is only just going off from what we're seeing up in the north. Down in other areas around Australia, it could be quite different. But as in for pesticides, which are getting into waterways, all that sort of thing, it has this sort of flow-on effect. But for us in the north, and you might have heard about the devastating bushfires which occurred pretty much, I think a lot of people around the world thought that Australia was all on fire. A lot of the east coast was actually damaged during the fire. We in the Northern Territory, we do prescribed burns, and so they have different times of the year where they'll go through and they'll burn little sections. So it's only little pockets here and there, and it's called patchwork burning. So it manages the land in that particular sense. But look, climate change will be a bit of an interesting one. If it's hotter days and if there's more fire fuel around in the environment, it could have a major effect. But yeah, for me, the number one would be habitat loss.
Okay. And somebody wondered what that black-necked stork was eating.
That was eating an eel-tailed catfish. So it's they get quite big, but so it was very much having a pretty good meal on that eel-tailed catfish, and it swallowed it down in one gulp. So yeah, it was gone in a matter of seconds.
And of course, a question that comes up quite frequently that people have wonder about in Australia is the snake issue. Australia has a number of venomous snakes, and people sometimes get the impression that it's overrun with snakes. What's the real situation? What's your experience of yours?
What's the real situation? Unfortunately, where we're located up in Darwin, around the top end, we're actually seeing less and less and less of these bigger, deadlier snakes. And that's actually due to an introduction of the cane toad. And so a lot of the actual snake population, the bigger, deadlier ones, they'll try to actually eat the cane toad, and the toad will excrete a bufotoxin, which then affects the heart. And literally within minutes, the animals are dead. And so, yeah, unfortunately, we're seeing less and less and less of the bigger, deadlier snakes. If you do get to see one, for me, it's a bonus. It is a real bonus to see an apex predator cruising around, just doing its thing, as long as you're leaving it to do whatever it does. I love personally seeing them. And yeah, it's one of those things. A lot of people think that there's snakes absolutely everywhere, but to be honest, if you get to see one, just treat it as a bonus, because yeah, they generally get out of the way a lot quicker than you come across them. So yeah.
What are the numbers? Speaking of numbers of birds in Australia, what's the total now, and about how many of them have occurred in the Northern Territory or in the top end?
Yeah, yep. So in Australia, we have approximately, I think what they define as numbers, there's over 900 species which have been seen in Australia, but there's quite a few of those which are either vagrants or rarities which have been blown in. And of course, that's also including offshore islands like Christmas Island, which is closer to Indonesia than what it is to Australia. But yeah, so a lot of people like to go over to places like Christmas Island at this time of year when there's a lot of storms coming in, because it blows in a lot of birds from Indonesia. So it gets their list of Australian birds going up and up and up. But the total number in Australia of breeding birds and birds that regularly come through, I think it's around about 750. But yeah, but there's, like I said, there's more and more and more that keep on coming through, just as in vagrants and rarities coming over.
And say in your typical 4-night, 5-day trip, how many species would you expect to see in the top end going out to Kakadu and Peak?
In a typical 4 to 5 sort of day trip, I'd be expecting to see about 140. So yeah, that'll be about the number. Just on a bit of an easy going, not chasing absolutely everywhere, but yeah, about 140, I'd say. The territory itself has just got just over 400 species found within the territory. So yeah, we get quite a few, but yeah, about 140, I'd say. It'd be a safe number. You'd give or take 10, I'd say. But yeah.
And also had a question about what would be the best time for the top end, would you say? And given the different conditions.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you're after the number of species, I'd say when you're getting migrant species coming back and coming through, you're looking at a time of when the water holes are coming down as well and shrinking, but it's generally the hottest time of year. And so that's around about November, December time. And so this is when a lot of bird species will come through. And of course, they'll be just hanging around the waterways, but you also get those birds coming through from Southeast Asia. And this is a bit of a bonus, but you do your birding early morning, and then you relax or you travel during the heat of the day in your air-conditioned vehicle. And then, of course, in the evening, you go out again. So as long as you can put up with a little bit of heat, and then, of course, you've got your air-conditioned comfort at nighttime. So during the night, you can relax and rest easy so you can get ready for another big day. But if you're coming over in around about June, July, this is typically when a lot of Australians will come to the territory. And the only reason why is because it's winter everywhere else around Australia, and Darwin's generally, well, one of the hotter places. So they're escaping their winter where it's, I don't know, 5 to 10 degrees, and they're coming up to 28, 30 degrees Celsius up around Darwin. So yeah, but if you're after the birds, any time is a good time. But yeah, birds en masse and different species, I'd say that November, December time is really good.
Luke, thank you so much.